Hey everybody, welcome back to Freedom Factor, and this is a new series I'm doing called Hot Take, where we are going to discuss a issue or topic that is considered controversial, and I will give kind of my hot take on it after discussing the issues relating to this controversial topic. So, let's get right into it. Today's topic is abortion. This one's going to be a hot one. So gear up, buckle up, and let's get started. And I do have to say as an advisement that this is discussing a very controversial and sensitive topic. And if you are sensitive to this topic, I would suggest not continuing. However, if you are interested in this topic and you want to hear considerations and listen to potentially agreeing or opposing arguments to this topic, then stick around because this is a juicy one and we're going to get right into it. So let's do this. So, abortion. Let's talk about it. First and foremost, I'm going to break down some parts to it. I'm going to break down the legal aspect, the moral aspect, the religious aspect, break down the argument, a lot of the main points about it, a lot of the main arguments for and against, and then where I stand and where my opinion, my beliefs stand with regard to libertarianism and the various spectrum within that belief system. Because I will say this, that no two libertarians have the same beliefs on abortion. And I will also tell you the conflict between my moral and political beliefs. So let's get into it. Abortion. We should all know by now. We're all adults here, or we should be adults. I will caveat this that this is kind of an 18 and up conversation. But I welcome any mature under 18s to have this conversation. However, the discussion on this is considering adult decision making. So, with that being said, what is an abortion? We should all know by now that an abortion is the termination of a pregnancy, usually through chemical or surgical means. I won't get into the nitty gritty on how that works because I don't feel that is appropriate, and it's just graphic. Let's just put it this way. There are main ways. There are others, but there are two main ways that an abortion occurs. It's either through surgical procedure or through a chemical procedure. And I will let you look that up if you are so inclined. So, every state has different laws with regard to abortion. But before we get into the states, we have to look at the federal decision process behind abortion. And that gets into some things regarding the Supreme Court. So, we're going to begin with the landmark decision of 1973, Roe v. Wade. Most people are aware of this, that Roe v. Wade is in fact a legal standing that had existed for a long, long time regarding abortion, that basically said, in a roundabout way, that abortion is legal from a federal standpoint. And we can kind of get into that, but really, essentially, Roe v. Wade made it legal. Then, in 2022, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, another landmark decision by the United States Supreme Court, overruled Roe v. Wade, and then also a 1992 case, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, returning the power to regulate abortion back to state instead of federal jurisdiction. So, to get rid of some of the misconceptions, Roe v. Wade kind of said that, it enshrined the abortion as kind of a right, so to speak. That basically the Constitution generally protected people's quote-unquote right to have an abortion and struck down many state abortion laws. I I will interject with my personal opinion real quick here. I know this is before I do my personal opinion, but I will interject with my personal opinion here because it is relevant. I agree with the Dobbs decision. I think that what the Dobbs decision did and what it didn't do, we'll get into. So the Dobbs decision returned the jurisdiction of abortion to the states, making it a state to state issue instead of a federalized issue. And I agree with this aspect. I agree that the Dobbs decision, abortion should have been a state issue because there's nothing in the Constitution that covers this. And as anybody who studies and knows about the United States Constitution, there's a part of the Constitution that basically says it's 10th Amendment stuff here, that anything not directly involved in the Constitution is the responsibility of the states. The states have the power, the right, to legislate things that are not delineated or not restricted at the federal level by the United States Constitution. And I agree with the Supreme Court here that the Constitution does not cover abortion, therefore it is a state's issue. What Dobbs did not do was just make it illegal to have an abortion. It's not like overturning Roe v. Wade suddenly made it so that abortion is illegal again. No. The legislation of abortion is returned to a state-by-state level, and that is the way it should have been from the start, in my personal opinion, and that is a morally consistent way to go about it from my viewpoint. So let's break down what the states have done since. And this is these facts are as of June 21st, 2024. So a few months ago. This is as up-to-date of information as I've been able to find in a quick search. So if I'm incorrect in some of these, please forgive me. I'm just going off of information as of June. So there are several categories with regard to abortion legislation at the state level. There's near total ban, up to 6 weeks, up to 12 weeks, up to 15 weeks, up to 18 weeks, 20 to 26 weeks. This is a range to kind of help so it's not so broken down. Up to third trimester, and then no gestational limit whatsoever. So let's begin with a near total ban. If I miss a state, please forgive me. I'm trying here. All right, so Idaho, North Dakota, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, and West Virginia all have a near total ban. These states will differ from state to state with exceptions, and I won't get into the minute details of that because then this video will take 4 hours, and I'm not looking to sit here and talk for that long, and I'm sure you don't want to listen to me for that long. So let's carry on. The up to 6 week legislation is Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. Those three states allow abortion up to 6 weeks. Nebraska, North Carolina are up to 12 weeks. Arizona is 15, and Utah is 18. The states that have a 20 to 26 week period, and this is done from a standpoint that right around that area, instead of breaking down each individual state at certain weeks. 20 to 26 weeks is a pretty good kind of range. So that is Washington, California, Nevada, Montana, Wyoming, Kansas, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Maine, Connecticut, Delaware, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Hawaii. Those states allow an abortion up to 20 to 26 weeks. They will vary from state to state. If you have any questions, please go view your state's legislature. They should have laws on the books, and you can look up individual states as they pertain to you. Virginia is the only state that just broadly says up to the third trimester. It's pretty easy there. Now, there are 9 states that have no gestational limitation on abortion, meaning, from a legal standpoint, I will break down into the arguments on this for and against later, but this means that there is no limit to when someone can have an abortion. You can have an abortion up to the day that you're due, or beyond, or whenever. And I will not get into the ramifications on that just yet. And that is Alaska, Oregon, New Mexico, Colorado, Minnesota, Michigan, Maryland, New Jersey, Vermont, and then also the District of Columbia. So, those are all the places that have no gestational limit. From a moral standpoint, there are two sides to this coin. The moral argument for and against is, boils down to one really big argument, and that is the delineation between when does a life begin and when does personhood begin. And that varies from state to state as well. Personhood is a very contentious topic relating to this, because where do you define? Where do you draw that line? Where does a person, where do you define a person? And there's a lot of disagreement on this. People say, well, when a child can survive outside of the womb, they can be considered a person. So if they were to be premature and they are viable and they can live, then they are a person. And that just, I think for me, and my stance on that is that personhood is way too ambiguous. We need a set kind of guideline. Life begins, a lot of people claim that a life begins at conception, when the sperm fertilizes an egg and cellular division begins and a new DNA code has been created, therefore it is a new life. I'll get into, that's the main argument. I'll get into where I believe this is where my beliefs come in. My opinion on this is that a life begins at conception, when it is a unique chain of DNA and cellular, if I could talk, cellular division begins. That is a new human life. It is a human being. Is it a person? I think person is kind of a really kind of contentious and ambiguous legal definition. However, I will say from a moral standpoint, the unjustified termination of a human life, I believe, is morally wrong. That's where I stand on this. So where does that apply to abortion? And where does that apply to libertarian principles? Well, there are two schools of thought with the libertarian principles, and that involves the non-aggression principle, which basically the non-aggression principle breaks down very simply to don't hurt other people. It's a core concept of the libertarian belief system, and it's basically kind of a non-coercive principle or a non-initiation of force, basically a non-aggression principle. There are some justifications, and I'm kind of on base with some of this, like consequentialism, where you base the non-aggression principle on rule of utilitarianism or rule egoism, and basically hold that violations of the non-aggression principle cannot be claimed to be objectively immoral. Adherence to it almost always leads to the best possible results, and so it should be accepted as a moral rule. This is believed by people like David Friedman, Ludwig von Mises, and Friedrich Hayek. I would say, kind of in concert with that, there are exceptions to the non-aggression principle that I believe in. I think that the non-aggression principle is a good principle to live by, and that should guide moral values and beliefs in a kind of a good and just, sane society. However, there are exceptions to the non-aggression principle, such as how do you deal with violations and intervention. If someone is trying to hurt someone else, they are violating the non-aggression principle. What should be done with them? And that is where I view a limited basis of the state coming in and kind of mitigating that or legislating that, because I believe in the rule of law, and I believe to a limited aspect that the state has a responsibility to enforce the rule of law only for the simple fact that we have not found a better way to do so without delving into anarchism in the bad way, not the good way. There's two types of anarchism. There's the NAP anarchism, and then there is the free-for-all anarchism that I think that is ridiculous and absurd. And yeah, so anarchism can really, in my belief, can only survive if everyone adheres to a non-aggression principle belief system. But that's a conversation for another day. Where does this play into abortion? Well, in my personal belief, I believe that abortion is a violation of the non-aggression principle because you are terminating a human being's life without just cause, i.e., defense of self or others. And we can get into some other aspects of that in a moment. But first, I will say that there are supporters and opponents on both sides of libertarianism that justify their position on NAP grounds, such as, all right, we'll get into it. We'll do it. Basically that an abortion is justified if the fetus is no longer welcome. If the mother no longer wants that fetus inside of her, the non-aggression it's basically an act of aggression to keep that fetus inside the mother. However, and it kind of goes on, like they say, it's like kind of the trespassing argument. And I'll get into why that's a little bit absurd in a moment here. But first off, from my belief, I believe it is a violation of the non-aggression principle to terminate a life without justification. I don't believe that an innocent developing baby, and I will just say it now, I consider it to be a child, a human being. I would pose the question to pro-abortion people who don't think it's a human being. If a fetus is not a human being, is not a human, then what species is it? I'm pretty sure it's not a dolphin. Probably not a cactus. It's a human. It is a human life in a very early stage of development. That is a scientifically consistent fact. Now, that gets into the whole theory behind does that human developing fetus have a right to basically require the mother to care for it? And that gets into the moral argument here that basically it's a responsibility of the mother. And that kind of leads to some ambiguity and leads to some controversy. The big controversy on that is that, nothing has, like a lot of people say, nothing has a right to demand another person's sacrifice for their benefit. But that gets into responsibility, and that's where my beliefs conflict with that ideal, because responsibility would dictate that if you engaged in sexual acts, a natural consequence as human beings, that's how we procreate, is via sex. That's a biological fact. That's no one should be arguing against that. If you want to maintain intellectual honesty, procreation is conducted via sexual intercourse. That is how humans reproduce. You can't really change that fact, and I will stand on this hill and I will argue with anyone in support of that ideal and in support of that fact. So I would say that basically one has consented to the possibility of pregnancy when they've engaged in sexual intercourse with another person of the opposite sex. That is a logical argument to be made, that if you have sex with someone, you consent to the possibility of pregnancy. Whether you like it or not, that is what is basically unsaid. And it's a fact. People will say, well, you should be allowed to have sex for pleasure. Yes, I'm not saying against that. I am simply stating, if you have sex, you accept the responsibility that there's potential of getting pregnant. If you take safeguards to avoid that, such as through contraceptive methods, I applaud that and I support that. If you want to have sex and not have children, you should go through that route. However, those are not 100%, and so you should assume the inherent risk. Everyone assumes risk every single day for different actions. Actions have consequences. Sexual activity has consequences, albeit very low in a lot of cases with regard to contraception, but they're not 100%. This is just a logical conclusion. I don't understand how people can argue against this. It's a logical conclusion. So, that is the argument there. Now, one side will say it is morally reprehensible to terminate a human life. The other will say, well, it's not a person, therefore it's not immoral to end that life. And so that's where my moral beliefs come into play, that I think it is morally wrong to terminate another human life without just cause. And I believe abortion is doing so, and I believe that life begins at conception, as I've already detailed. Then there's the religious aspect, which a lot of people will say that these come from religious morals, such as the Christian belief. And me being a Christian, I believe this, that God knew us in the womb before we were born. He knew us before we were created. He knew us eons ago, ad infinitum, before humans existed. He knew each and every one of us. That is where religious beliefs dictate that. However, I know plenty of Christians who are pro-abortion. I know plenty of Christians who are anti-abortion. I know plenty of atheists who are anti-abortion and don't base that on a religious belief system. So where I stand on this is, morally I am opposed, but legally I think kind of in line with the Dobbs decision. However, I disagree with laws that have no exception to their abortion legislation. What does that mean? So there are some states that have no exceptions to abortions. They say abortion itself is wrong no matter what. And that's where we get into, I will say, two main arguments, because and I will kind of discount, I will mention, but I will not go into the weeds on minor pregnancies, because this, I feel, is a very convoluted section of this topic, and I feel that since technically speaking a minor cannot consent, therefore that just muddies the water way too much, and I'm not going to get into that. However, I will say the two exceptions that most people state, and these are exceptions that one I kind of sort of agree with, and the other I agree with. The first one that I fully agree with, that I think should be an exception, full stop, everywhere, no matter what, is medical emergency. If there is a threat to one or more life in regard to the pregnancy, be it the child or the mother, it doesn't matter, and a doctor determines that if the pregnancy is allowed to continue, there is a high likelihood of a threat to one or both lives, then that should be a medical intervention should be allowable. That is my belief. You are free to disagree, but I think that a medical exception should always exist, especially with regard to abortion law. No law should be absolute. There should be exceptions, such as with self-defense, or I guess homicide. We'll go with homicide. Notice I said homicide, not murder. There's a difference between homicide and murder. Homicide is when homicide becomes murder, it is unjustified. When justified homicide happens, basically the justified killing of another person, namely, and there are some other ones, but namely the big one is defense of self or others. If someone is threatening the life or serious bodily injury to somebody else or yourself, you are, I think, 100% absolutely justified in defending yourself, whether that leads to homicide or not. If homicide is a result, I believe that is a justifiable homicide. With regard to abortion, that's where we get into some more kind of morally ambiguous things there, and that's, back to that whole argument about the taking of a life to protect the mother perceived, even though it's not scientifically or medically determined to be absolute, like to be that is the case. But that roots into absolutism. I don't believe in absolutism. I think in absolute, that there should always be exception. So with regard to legislation on abortion, I believe there should always be an exception to the rule, like medical intervention being necessary to protect or save the life of one or more parties involved with the abortion, or involved with the pregnancy, I should say. Now, this is where things get a little more convoluted with regard to my personal belief, and then also acknowledging certain realities, and that is the cases of rape. A lot of proponents, a lot of anti-abortion people will say that they believe in an exception for rape. I won't get into incest because that's a completely different thing, and incest really boils down to consent. So I won't go into that. That's delving too far into consent rules. But with regard to rape, my personal belief, dispassionately, if you remove all emotion and feeling from it, dispassionately, what I believe is that a child, which I will refer to a fetus, I will use the term child interchangeably with fetus. A fetus is a child at an earlier stage of development than an infant or a toddler. So, that being said, I don't believe a child should be punished for the acts of someone else. In cases of rape, why would you? I pose the question: why would you punish an innocent life for the acts of someone else? However, there comes in the realization when you bring in the human factor. That is where I say rape, I think, should be an exception, because I also think, morally speaking, no woman should have to, because she didn't consent to sexual intercourse. So therefore, again, with consent, this is where I will delve into consent. If the woman does not consent to sexual intercourse, she does not assume any risk with getting pregnant. Therefore, if the sexual intercourse is non-consensual, she shouldn't be responsible for the result, if that result is pregnancy. So I think there should be an exception allowable in those instances, even though morally I disagree with the fact that punishing the child for the acts of someone else is wrong. But I understand from a human factor aspect that is a traumatic experience. It's a very personal experience. It's a very personal violation of someone's just their being. And I think rape is a very, very large violation of the non-aggression principle. And I think that rape is right up there almost with murder. That it is so morally wrong, and we should never allow for it. So in those cases, yes, I believe that is a perfectly allowable exception to the rule. Now, this is where my conflict of morals and libertarian principles comes in, because the enforcement of these rules is done by the state. And I, being a libertarian, believe that the state's powers should be limited excessively. There are too many laws on the books as there are currently, and I think states making it so that states have complete restrictions is wrong. But I also think states like my home state of Colorado having absolutely no gestational restrictions whatsoever is also wrong. I would be willing, and this is where I kind of I could hear people say you're a hypocrite or whatever. No, it's the recognition of liberty. Whereas I feel like this is the worst part of this whole debate, is the fact that there is the argument to be made that abortion is the unjustified killing of another human being, and therefore, absent the aforementioned exceptions, is wrong. And I think a large majority of abortions are done for personal reasons, but usually for kind of as a sort of method of birth control. It was an unplanned or unwanted pregnancy. And again, dismissing the argument I made previously about the fact that consent to intercourse is also accepting responsibility of potential for pregnancy, dismissing that argument entirely. From a liberty standpoint, a lot of abortions are made from the kind of birth control side of things, and that is not to be insensitive or callous. It is just a fact that a lot of people, it boils down to the bare bones. No matter what justification people try to use, it is still used as a form of birth control. Now, I do recognize, and this is where I would say some limitation could be utilized. Like, I would agree kind of with somewhere in between Arizona and let's just look. Hold on, let me look this up real quick, just to make sure that but the 20 to 26 week range, let's say like Montana maybe would be a good kind of standpoint. Montana is up until fetal viability, which is 24 to 26 weeks gestation. Somewhere between there and, like, let's just call it Arizona, 15 weeks. So 16 to 24 week, I think, is fair for a good, consistent thing, because I recognize the human factor. Again, you cannot just argue this without considering the humanity of it. Many people, and I don't have all the figures in front of me, but I've just on what I've read in previous time, because I'm not a walking encyclopedia where I have all of my sources cited in a folder of bookmarks. It's gained from knowledge gained over the years, various sources that I've read. However, a lot of surveys and a lot of data suggests that a lot of main reasons people get abortions is due to responsibility or economic reasons. And I recognize that, and I can acknowledge that, and I can respect that. If, a lot of people will say people get an abortion because they cannot afford to have a child. They cannot afford to care for that child. They can't afford to feed that child. That is understandable. However, I would say to most cases, an alternative is adoption. And yes, that gets into adoption is a very convoluted and messy subject, and it's also a part of society that is not without its problems. So I won't get too far into that. I'm just saying that is an exit ramp for this entire conversation. Always is if you discount and you take out the risk to life aspect of it, that economic viability is a reason, but if you discount all the emergency exceptions, an off-ramp for abortion is to avoid abortion, I should say. An off-ramp to avoid abortion is always adoption. That should be an option, or that should be a consideration by the pro-abortion people. But I digress. With regard to reasoning that I think is justified to a degree, I don't agree, like, morally, I object to it. I think that termination of a life is wrong, absent the exclusions that I've mentioned before. I do think if one is not responsible enough, again, getting to the whole consent thing and the whole minor issue, that's another can of worms. But the economic one, I can respect that as being a logical reasoning behind why some people opt for the decision of abortion. They can't care for the child. They can't feed the child. They can't afford to adequately provide for that child. That is understandable. However, I will say caveat to that there are tons of services and programs and organizations out there that can help with that. So that kind of diminishes the legitimacy of that argument. But I understand that as being a reason that people cannot care for the child or are incapable, such as people of diminished capacity who end up getting pregnant, in which case that is also that is a conversation that can be had as well. People who literally cannot care for a child because they are of diminished mental capacity. I understand that as well. And there are considerations with that too. Also, the danger. I mean, pregnancy is a dangerous thing. Granted, the majority of pregnancies that are carried out to full term are successful and have very few issues. I understand case by case. Every pregnancy is different. Everyone is different. Having been through my wife's pregnancy, it was considered quote unquote high risk, but we didn't really have any problems, any real major issues during the pregnancy. It was during the birth that there were issues. I'll just say that. I won't get into it, but I recognize that. But a lot of times, people will use the argument, well, it's a risky endeavor getting pregnant and carrying a child to term that could potentially end in the loss of life. In which case, on a case-by-case basis, that should be considered between you and your doctor. And that's where I feel that the exception, the medical exception, should always be, and states that do away with that exception are wrong. Finally, to conclude this, there is the legal ramifications of the whole abortion conversation, and that is who gets punished and how. Many states, and I haven't looked at every single state, but I know many states will not punish the mother, but instead will go after the doctor. They will hold them legally and civilly liable for violating the abortion laws of that state. In which case, I think, absent a medical exception, I think that's fair if the doctors should know the laws of the state that they're working in. However, and this is where legislatures can be in conflict with the Hippocratic Oath, where doctors have taken the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm, by allowing a pregnancy to continue, knowing that that pregnancy will kill one or both of the parties involved with the pregnancy, the child or the mother. That is where I think the legislature is wrong if they do not allow that determination to be made by a medical doctor. Because let's face it, the vast majority, I know that there are some exceptions. There are legislators out there that are medical doctors. Rand Paul comes to mind as a medical doctor who is a legislator. But at the state level, a legislation is not a medical profession. So I think that's a determination that should be made by a medical doctor, and they should be free from any liability if the decision is made with regard to preservation of life and fulfilling the Hippocratic Oath of doing no harm, such as allowing a pregnancy to continue that will result in the death of one or more parties involved with the pregnancy. That's it. So, I fully anticipate that, hence why this is called Hot Take, I fully anticipate that this is going to rile some people up. This is going to inflame some emotions. This is definitely going to cause a lot of controversy. And I'm welcoming that from a mature standpoint. I normally, on any of my YouTube channels, because I do run a couple, but especially with regard to Freedom Factor, anything not made in good faith, anything that is derogatory or wrong or overly callous or crude, I will not entertain, and I will delete comments that are not made from a place of good faith argument and respect, because I'm trying to be respectful to everybody, and I feel that everybody else should be respectful of differing opinions. And I fully support differing opinions as long as they are based on respect. So, that being said, I fully anticipate that the comment section is going to be ablaze. And I honestly will say that I'm pretty sure YouTube's going to, deem this as a non-monetized or shadow banned or whatever their algorithms, because I use the RAPE word. And I guess YouTube doesn't allow for that. But whatever. It's a conversation that needs to be had, and not to kind of quote him, I know a lot of people are enraged by him, but Charlie Kirk makes a good point of having a conversation, having those difficult talks is what leads to good civil discourse. If we If we refuse to talk about it, we just further divide each other. So, I welcome any comments as long as they're from a place of respect and made in good faith. But there is abortion on Hot Take. Thank you for tuning in, and if you want to, I will never overly ask, but if you want to like this video, share this video, subscribe, please do so. If you don't want to, that's your choice to make as well, but I thank you for tuning in if you've made it this far. This is probably around 40 minutes long now. If you've made it this far, I applaud you and I thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Have a great day.